My name is Lola Shaw, 32 years old, former sergeant, U.S. Army. And in that moment, in the emergency room of St. Vincent Hospital in Portland, I realized the most terrifying wound wasn't the one that took my left leg in Afghanistan. It was the wound of being invisible inside my own family. For the first time, I saw the 28 missed calls, a number on a screen that didn't even feel real. They were from the same people who'd said they were too busy to pick me up from the airport just hours before. My hand trembled as the monitor beside my bed kept its steady, rhythmic beep. The sterile air was thick with the smell of antiseptic. I played back the last voicemail my mother had left, her voice not filled with worry, but with a frantic, theatrical anger. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're listening from. Please support me by liking and subscribing if you want to hear more stories about overcoming adversity. The first thing I felt wasn't the scratchy hospital sheets or the IV taped to the back of my hand. It was the rhythmic, hammering pain behind my eyes, a blacksmith forging a migraine inside my skull. The first thing I heard wasn't a doctor's voice. It was a sound that would become the soundtrack to my awakening, the steady, indifferent beep of a heart monitor counting out the seconds of my new life. Sergeant Shaw, Lola, can you hear me? A voice, gentle but firm, cut through the fog. I blinked, and the fluorescent lights above me blurred into a painful white smear. A woman in blue scrubs came into focus. Her name tag read Clara. Her eyes were kind, but held the tired efficiency of someone who had seen it all. "You're at St. Vincent's," she explained, her voice low and calm. "A neighbor called 911. You were unresponsive. You had carbon monoxide poisoning. You're very lucky, Sergeant." Lucky. The word echoed in the hollow space of my mind. I tried to nod, but even that small movement sent a fresh wave of pain through my head. Clara seemed to understand. She adjusted my pillow, then held up my cell phone. "This was in your pocket," she said. "It hasn't stopped buzzing for the last hour." She handed it to me. The screen lit up, a blinding rectangle in the dim room. And there it was. 28 missed calls, dozens of text messages. The notifications were stacked so high they looked like a glitch in the system. For a heartbeat, a flicker of warmth tried to ignite in my chest, the thought that someone, somewhere, was worried sick. But it was extinguished as quickly as it came. This didn't feel like concern. It felt like an assault, a demand. A chill traced its way up my spine, a coldness that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. It was the icy touch of realization. My hand, the one holding the phone, felt numb. I finally understood. They weren't calling because they were worried about me. They were calling because they were worried for themselves. My thumb hovered over the screen, over the most recent voicemail notification. It was from my mother, Eleanor. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear, the plastic cool against my skin. Her voice wasn't the trembling, tearful whisper of a mother who had just found out her daughter was in the ER. It was shrill, high-pitched with a familiar, theatrical panic. "Lola, what on earth are you doing?" the voice screeched, devoid of any warmth. "Barbara next door just texted me. She said an ambulance was at the house. Do you have any idea how that looks? You're making us look like monsters. Call me back right now." The voicemail ended with an angry click. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it. Silence. There had been no, "Are you okay?" No. "Lola, what happened?" No. "Are you alive?" Each of her words was a shard of glass, embedding itself in my chest, not with a sharp, clean pain, but with the dull, grinding ache of an old wound being torn open. And in that sterile, beeping silence, the truth crystallized. In their meticulously curated world, the world of perfect Instagram family portraits and Lake Oswego real estate deals, I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a soldier who had come home wounded. I was a public relations problem, a loose thread that threatened to unravel the perfect tapestry they had woven for themselves. Clara came back into the room, carrying a small paper cup of water. She must have seen the look on my face, the way the phone had slipped from my fingers onto the blanket. Her professional mask softened into something like genuine empathy. Her eyes, which had seen so much, looked at me and truly saw me. "Do you want me to call them back for you, Sergeant?" she asked gently. I looked up from the phone, from the screen that represented a lifetime of feeling like an afterthought, and met her gaze. It was the first time all day, maybe the first time in years, that I'd looked into someone's eyes and not seen judgment or expectation. In that stranger's kindness, a strength I never knew I possessed began to rise from the depths of my exhaustion. No, I said. My voice was a hoarse whisper, but it was unbreakable. Thank you, Clara. But could you do something else for me? I took a breath. Could you block these numbers for me, at least for now? It wasn't an act of anger. There was no fire, no rage. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the quiet, desperate act of a soldier in a foxhole piling up sandbags against incoming fire. For the first time in my 31 years, I was choosing my own peace over their manufactured anxiety. Clara simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. She took the phone and her fingers moved quickly over the screen. As she worked, my eyes scanned the other notifications I hadn't cleared. A text from my father, Arthur. My stomach clenched before I even opened it. The message wasn't a question about my health. It was a command. Lola, the family lawyer says you are not to speak to anyone until we've spoken to you. Don't make this worse. The cold, transactional nature of the words made me feel sick. The family lawyer. They hadn't called a doctor for an update. They hadn't rushed to the hospital. They had called their lawyer. This wasn't a family tragedy. It was a legal crisis, a damage control situation. I clicked the power button and the screen went black, silencing the chorus of their demands. The only sound left was the steady, rhythmic beep of the machine that was measuring my heartbeat. I leaned my head back against the stiff hospital pillow, the hammering pain a dull throb now. I closed my eyes, but the images of the missed calls, the sound of my mother's voice, the cold text from my father were burned into my mind. How did it ever get to this? The question echoed in the sterile silence of my hospital room, and my mind, fragile as it was, drifted backward, pulling me into the memories of the day before. It started with a fragile, stubborn sliver of hope at 30,000 feet. The flight from Ramstein Air Base in Germany was an 18-hour ordeal. 18 hours trapped in a pressurized tube where every inch of my body ached. But the worst of it was the dull, throbbing fire in the stump of my left leg. It swelled in the cramped economy seat, a constant, brutal reminder of the piece of me I'd left behind in the dust of Kandahar. Every bit of turbulence sent a phantom shockwave up my spine. Around me, the plane was buzzing with a nervous, joyful energy. Young soldiers, barely out of their teens, were passing their phones back and forth, showing off pictures of girlfriends, new babies, and golden retrievers. They talked loudly about the first things they were going to eat. A real double cheeseburger from In-N-Out, their mom's pot roast, a slice of deep dish pizza. They were going home to a hero's welcome. I stayed silent, my headphones on with no music playing, just a dull hum to block out the world. I was clutching onto the hope that my own sacrifice, my own quiet endurance, would finally mean something to the people I was flying toward. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my mother, my thumb clumsy from exhaustion. About to land. Can't wait to see everyone. I watched the 3 little dots appear and disappear. A minute later, her reply came. It wasn't a sentence. It was a single, blue icon. A thumbs-up emoji. The Portland International Airport was a chaotic symphony of light and sound. Families were pressed against the glass, holding up colorful, hand-painted signs. Welcome home, Daddy. We missed you, our hero. I stood alone by the baggage claim, the weight of my duffel bag and the awkwardness of my new prosthesis making me feel unsteady on my own 2 feet. One reel, one carbon fiber. Around me, reunions exploded like fireworks. A wife leaped into her husband's arms, sobbing into his uniform. A little boy, no older than 5, sprinted across the polished floor and buried his face in his father's legs. I watched it all, feeling like a ghost, haunting someone else's happy ending. I reached into my worn leather wallet and pulled out a faded, dog-eared photograph. It was of Caleb, my husband, taken on the day he graduated from basic training, his smile so bright it could have lit up the whole airfield. I remembered the last time I saw him, right before my final deployment. He held my face in his hands, his eyes serious. "When you come home, Lo," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion, "my whole world will be right here waiting for you." He was gone now, killed by the same war that had claimed my leg. And the rest of my world wasn't coming. My phone buzzed and my heart gave a stupid little leap. Maybe it was them, running late. It was a text from my brother, Preston. "Sorry sis, last-minute client emergency. One of my big Lake Oswego listings. Can you grab an Uber? I'll send you the money later." Each word was a slap. Not even a phone call. Just a quick, dismissive text. A business transaction. I stared at the message, then looked up at the joyful crowd around me. I'd never felt so invisible, so utterly alone. A soldier home from war, lost in the very place she was supposed to belong. The Uber ride was silent. The driver didn't ask where I'd come from. I watched the familiar green landscape of Oregon slide past the window, the tall Douglas firs and the gray, drizzly sky feeling alien to me now. The car pulled up to the curb of my childhood home, the place I'd once thought of as a sanctuary. There were no lights on, not even a porch light to welcome me home. A thick blanket of dead, damp leaves covered the walkway. The driver helped me with my bag, gave me a polite nod, and drove away, leaving me alone in the oppressive darkness. The air inside the house was cold and musty, the smell of dust and neglect. I flicked on a light. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt wrong. The refrigerator was a barren, white cavern. A half-empty bottle of ketchup and an old jar of pickles were all that was left. On the granite countertop, propped against the fruit bowl, was a yellow sticky note in my mother's perfect, looping cursive. "Lola, you'll have to turn on the heat yourself. The gas bill was sky-high this month." The casual cruelty of it stole the last of my strength. The cold wasn't just in the air anymore, it was in my bones. I didn't have the energy to face the stairs, to find my old bedroom. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and collapsed onto the living room's old floral sofa, the fabric rough against my cheek. Exhaustion was a lead blanket, pulling me down into a deep, dreamless state. I didn't know that the old gas furnace in the basement, the one my father always meant to get serviced, was faulty. I didn't know that as it kicked on to fight the autumn chill, it was slowly, silently, pumping colorless, odorless carbon monoxide into the sealed room. I drifted. In the hazy space between sleep and something deeper, I saw him. Caleb. He was standing in a field of sunlight, wearing his favorite flannel shirt, that easy grin on his face. He wasn't saying anything. He just held out his hand. A profound sense of peace washed over me, a warmth that spread through my limbs, chasing away the cold. The sleepiness was so heavy now, so inviting. It felt like coming home. My last thought wasn't of fear. It wasn't a desperate fight for life. It was just a quiet, weary surrender. Finally, I can rest. The silence in that hospital room wasn't empty. It was filled with ghosts. The echoes of a lifetime spent learning to be quiet, to take up less space, to swallow my own pain so it wouldn't inconvenience anyone else. The 28 missed calls weren't the start of something new. They were just the loudest tolling of a bell that had been ringing my entire life. It started when I was 8. I was a fearless tree climber back then, and the giant oak in our backyard was my kingdom. One hot July afternoon, I slipped. I remember the sickening snap more clearly than the fall itself. The pain was a white-hot lightning bolt that shot from my wrist all the way up to my shoulder. But the memory that truly seared itself into my mind was the look on my parents' faces when I stumbled into the house, crying, cradling my arm. It wasn't concern. It was annoyance. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Lola," my mother Eleanor sighed, putting a hand to her temple. "Of all the times. Preston's championship game is in 2 hours." At the urgent care, the doctor confirmed it was a clean break. He set the bone and wrapped my arm in a heavy white plaster cast. On the way home, my parents were silent. They didn't comfort me. They didn't ask if I was scared. They dropped me off at our neighbor's house with a carton of juice and a bag of pretzels. Then, they left for the game. Later that night, they came home triumphant. Preston's team had won. To celebrate, my father, Arthur, had gone out and bought a brand new big-screen television. From my bedroom, I could hear their laughter and cheers echoing up the stairs as they unboxed it and set it up. I sat alone on my bed, staring at the alien white weight on my arm, the tips of my fingers already swelling and blue. And I learned my first lesson. My pain was an inconvenience. My brother's victories were a cause for celebration. This pattern, this unspoken family doctrine, repeated itself over and over. 10 years later, after my high school graduation, my parents threw a big backyard barbecue. The air was thick with the smell of grilled burgers and fresh-cut grass. Most of the gifts and congratulations were for Preston. He'd just been accepted to the University of Oregon's football team. I, on the other hand, had earned a partial academic scholarship to Portland State. I was proud of it. I'd worked hard for it. At one point, my father clapped me on the shoulder, a little too hard, and announced to a group of neighbors, his voice booming with false pride, "And this one here, she's the smart one. Got herself a scholarship." He paused, then delivered the punchline with a wink. "At least she won't cost us as much." The neighbors chuckled politely. And just like that, my small moment of achievement was extinguished, reduced to a line item on the family budget. I was not the celebrated athlete. I was the less expensive liability. That conversation continued in private a week later. My father called me into his home office, a room that always smelled of leather and stale coffee. He didn't say congratulations. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen and started scribbling numbers: tuition, books, room, and board. "This scholarship is good, Lola," he said, tapping the pen on the paper. "But don't get the idea that there's more where that came from. All of our resources are focused on Preston right now. You're going to have to be self-sufficient." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. A clear, cold line drawn in the sand, both financially and emotionally. So that's what I did. I got 3 part-time jobs while I was at Portland State. I was a barista at 6 a.m., a library assistant in the afternoon, and a waitress on weekends. I was always tired, but I was self-sufficient. I met Caleb my junior year. He was the first person who ever saw the exhaustion behind my smile. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, I found myself telling him everything. The broken arm, the scholarship, the constant draining feeling of being second best. When I finished, he didn't say, "Your family is terrible." He just listened, his gaze steady and kind. He took my hand, his thumb gently tracing circles on my palm. "They have no idea what they're missing, Lo," he said softly, his voice a balm on a wound I didn't even know was festering. "It's like they're holding a diamond in their hands, but they're too busy staring at shiny pebbles." It was the first time anyone had ever validated my pain. The first time anyone had told me I wasn't wrong to feel the way I did. He made me feel seen. He made me feel worthy. The day I left for basic training, only my mother drove me to the airport. My father and Preston were tied up at a golf tournament. She didn't hug me at the security gate. She just pressed a folded $20 bill into my hand. "Try not to cause any trouble," she said, her voice flat, "and send money home if you can." As the plane took off, I watched the city of Portland shrink below, the familiar bridges and green hills fading into the clouds. I didn't feel sad. I felt a profound sense of relief. For the first time, I felt like I was flying toward something, not just away from it. I was flying toward a place where my worth would be measured by my actions, not by whether or not I was a burden. And as I think back on that girl, the one who thought joining the army was the only way to escape, it makes me wonder. If you've ever felt like you had to go to extreme lengths just to find a place where you were valued for who you are, please support me by liking this story. And in the comments, just type one word: I understand. It would mean the world to know I'm not alone. That hope, that belief in a new kind of family, was what carried me through everything. It carried me through the sandstorms and the firefights. It carried me through the day I lost Caleb. It carried me through the day I lost my leg. And it was the last flickering ember of that hope that I carried with me on that 18-hour flight home, believing that this time things would be different, believing that my sacrifice would finally be enough. I just didn't know then that some walls are too old and too thick to ever hear you, no matter how loudly you're screaming on the inside. I came home from the hospital to the same cold, silent house. The yellow sticky note was still on the counter, a testament to the chilling indifference that had almost killed me. For the first few days, I lived in a gray fog of exhaustion and grief, moving from the lumpy sofa to the empty kitchen and back again. The silence was a physical weight pressing down on me. I had never felt more alone. Then, one afternoon, there was a soft knock on the door. I hesitated, my heart starting to pound. I wasn't ready to face my family, not yet. But when I peered through the peephole, I saw Margot from across the street. She was a tiny Italian widow in her 70s, with a cloud of white hair and hands that were always covered in flour. I opened the door a crack. She didn't offer a pitying smile or ask a flood of invasive questions. She simply held out a heavy ceramic casserole dish, wrapped in a checkered kitchen towel. The rich, warm scent of garlic, tomato, and melted cheese filled the cold air on my porch. "You eat," she said, her voice raspy but kind. Her dark, knowing eyes met mine. "Healing needs fuel." She pressed the dish into my hands, gave my arm a gentle pat, and turned to walk back to her own house before I could even find the words to thank her. I carried the lasagna inside, its warmth seeping through the towel into my cold hands. I sat at the kitchen table and ate directly from the dish with a fork. It was rich and savory, made with a love and care I hadn't tasted in years. Each bite was a small act of kindness that began to melt the thick layer of ice that had formed around my heart. It was the first hot meal I'd had in days. It was the first sign that I wasn't entirely alone. Unbeknownst to me, my story had begun to travel on whispers. Nurse Clara, the one who had blocked the numbers on my phone, had told her husband what she'd witnessed. He, in turn, mentioned it to a friend who worked as a producer at a local news station. That friend passed the story along to a young, hungry reporter named Julian Vance. Julian wasn't interested in a sensational headline. He was a Portland native, an idealist who believed in telling stories that mattered. He saw something more in my situation than just a family dispute. He saw a story about a soldier's return, about sacrifice and neglect. He started digging quietly, talking to my neighbor Margot, to a few people at the airport who remembered seeing a lone soldier waiting by the baggage claim. He was piecing together the truth, not for the drama, but for the principle of it. The morning after Margot's visit, I opened my front door to find a small, rustic bouquet of wildflowers, black-eyed Susans and purple asters, propped against the door in a glass jar. There was no note. The next day, it was a paper bag filled with fresh vegetables from someone's garden, a massive zucchini and a handful of ripe, red tomatoes. The day after that, a crisp copy of the Oregonian newspaper. Every morning brought a new, small token of anonymous kindness. These were offerings from strangers, from neighbors I'd only ever waved to. And they were doing the one thing my family had never learned to do. They were showing up. Their silent, consistent presence was both a profound comfort and a painful reminder. Each thoughtful gesture was a bittersweet contrast to the empty promises and hollow words I was used to. These people, with their simple gifts, were telling me, without a single word, that I was worthy of care. One rainy Portland afternoon, a large gift basket appeared on my porch. It was wrapped in cellophane and tied with a green ribbon, the color of my old high school. Inside, my breath caught in my throat. It was a curated collection of everything that tasted like home. A bag of dark roast from Stumptown coffee, a few bottles of Rogue Dead Guy ale, and a bar of woodblock chocolate. Tucked inside was a handwritten card. I opened it, my fingers trembling slightly. It was from a group of my old classmates, people I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The card read, "Lola, we heard you were home and wanted to send our love. We always remembered you as the kindest, smartest person in our class. We're so proud of your service and everything you are. Welcome home." I sank down onto the steps of my porch, oblivious to the damp cold, and I cried. I cried for the first time since coming home. They weren't tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking gratitude. These people remembered me. They saw me. It was later that week that the phone rang. It was an unknown number, and I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. "Sergeant Shaw?" a man's voice asked. It was polite, respectful. "My name is Julian Vance. I'm a reporter with the local news." I immediately tensed, ready to hang up. "Please, don't hang up," he said quickly, as if reading my mind. "I'm not calling for a cheap soundbite. I've been speaking to some people, and I know your story. I know what happened when you came home." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And I believe it's a story that needs to be heard. Not for pity, Sergeant, for the truth." I listened, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. "The choice is yours," he finished, his voice steady and sincere. "I won't pressure you. But if you decide to speak, I promise I will tell it right." The offer hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken possibilities. This wasn't just an interview, it was a crossroads. It was a chance to take the narrative of my life out of the hands of the people who had tried to silence it. It was a chance to finally, after all these years, reclaim my own voice. That night, sleep was a stranger. Julian's offer echoed in the darkness of my living room, replaying itself over and over. "I promise I will tell it right." For hours, I paced the worn wooden floors, my prosthesis making a soft, rhythmic tap-click on the boards. A war was raging inside me. On one side was the ingrained, lifelong fear, the voice of my mother in my head, warning me not to cause a scene, not to make trouble. On the other side was a new, fragile yearning, the desire to be heard, to have my truth exist somewhere outside the four walls of that house. Exhausted, I sat down and opened my laptop. I found myself searching for an old TED Talk I'd saved years ago, one by Brené Brown. I watched as she spoke about the power of vulnerability, and one sentence hit me like a physical blow. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. Courage. It wasn't about being fearless. It was about being terrified and doing it anyway. It was about choosing to show up and be seen when you can't control the outcome. At that moment, something inside me settled. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclamation. The next morning, my hand was steady as I dialed Julian's number. When he answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm ready," I said. Just 2 words, but they felt heavier than anything I'd ever lifted. He came to my house that afternoon. There was no intrusive camera crew, no bright lights. It was just him, a kind-faced man in his late 20s with a small professional audio recorder that he placed gently on the coffee table between us. He didn't start with the sensational questions I'd been dreading. He didn't ask about my leg or the war. He just looked at me with sincere eyes and asked, "Sergeant Shaw, tell me what it felt like to come home." And for the first time, I did. The story poured out of me, not in a torrent of tears, but in a steady, even stream. I spoke of the bone-deep weariness of the flight, the sharp pang of disappointment at the airport, the hollow chill of the empty house. I described the single thumbs-up emoji and the sticky note about the gas bill. I didn't embellish. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The truth, stripped bare of all emotion, was damning enough. My voice was flat, heavy with the weight of years of swallowed words. I was simply a soldier giving her report, stating the facts as they had occurred. The story aired that night on the 6 o'clock news. It wasn't just a local news segment, it was a bombshell. Julian had kept his promise. He told it right. He juxtaposed my quiet, factual account with images of soldiers being welcomed home, with quotes from neighbors, with the cold, hard facts of my service record. And then, the storm broke. My phone, which I'd unblocked out of some morbid curiosity, started to vibrate. Then, it didn't stop. It was a deluge. On Twitter, the hashtag #YPS Welcome Home Lola was exploding. It started in Portland, then Oregon, then it was trending nationally. My dormant Facebook account was flooded with thousands of friend requests and messages. They were from other veterans. "We see you, Sergeant. We've been there." They were from mothers. As a mom, My heart is broken for you. You deserve so much better. They were from sons and daughters who felt like the black sheep of their own families. Thank you for speaking my truth. I felt invisible for 20 years. They didn't just see a wounded soldier. They saw themselves. They saw their own silent battles, their own quiet heartbreaks reflected in my story. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was seen by thousands of strangers, and their collective voice was a deafening roar of validation. Just as I was trying to process the wave of support, another story broke online. Preston, my brother, had posted on his professional Facebook page. He'd chosen an old family photo from years ago. One of those perfect posed portraits from a family vacation in Hawaii. We were all smiling, tanned, a picture of American prosperity. His caption read, "Family is everything. Sometimes there are misunderstandings, but the love is always there. It's sad when some people choose to tell a distorted story just to get attention." Thinking of my sister and hoping she finds peace. The gaslighting was so blatant, so perfectly crafted, it took my breath away. He was painting me as unstable, a liar, an attention seeker. He was playing the victim. It was a masterclass in manipulation. And then, just as I was reading the furious comments pouring in under his post, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. My hand shook as I let it go to voicemail. A second later, a new message from Preston. Then, my father. The dam had broken. I listened to my mother's message first. The frantic, high-pitched panic was back, but this time it was laced with saccharine, fake sobs. "Lola, how could you do this to your family?" she wailed. "After everything we've done for you, you're airing our private business to the entire world. You are so selfish." Next, Preston's. His voice was a low, guttural roar, the voice he used when a business deal went south. "You've ruined everything. Do you understand me? Everything. My clients are calling me. They're canceling contracts. My reputation is shot because of your little pity party." And finally, my father's. His was the calmest, and by far the most terrifying. "Lola," he said, his voice cold and clipped like a CEO delivering bad news. "You have made a grave miscalculation. You will stop this now." I turned the phone off. I sat there in the quiet of my living room, the glow of the trending hashtag on my laptop screen, the echo of their voices still ringing in my ears. There was no, "Lola, we are so sorry." No, "We messed up." No, "Let's fix this." There was only rage at having their perfect image shattered. There was only selfish panic, only blame. And that, more than the thousands of messages of support, more than the trending hashtag, was the only validation I ever truly needed. It confirmed, in their own panicked, furious words, that I had done the absolute right thing. The phone calls and voicemails were just the opening barrage. I knew the ground assault was coming. I just didn't know it would be so soon. 2 days after the story aired, my hospital room door burst open without a knock. It wasn't a doctor or a nurse. It was my family. They marched in like an invading army on a mission of damage control. My father, Arthur, led the charge, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury. My mother, Eleanor, trailed behind him, dabbing at her puffy, red-rimmed eyes with a tissue. A performance of sorrow so theatrical, it was insulting. In her other hand, she clutched a bouquet of cheap, grocery store carnations, the floral equivalent of a half-hearted apology. And Preston, my brother, hovered near the back, his eyes glued to his phone as if the fate of the free world depended on his Twitter feed. They weren't here to see their wounded daughter. They were here to extinguish a media firestorm. My mother didn't even look at me. Her first act was to stride to the window overlooking the hospital parking lot, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum. She yanked the plastic blinds shut with a loud clatter. "Do you have any idea that reporters are camped out down there?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "This is a complete humiliation." That one act, that single gesture, told me everything I needed to know. Her priority wasn't my well-being. It was the optics. My father stepped forward, assuming the role of the disappointed but reasonable patriarch. His voice was laced with that familiar, condescending tone he used when closing a difficult sale. "Lola, we are a family," he began, as if reciting a line from a script. "Whatever issues we have should be handled in private. You've blown this entire situation completely out of proportion." My mother turned from the window, the crocodile tears now flowing freely. "I know I'm not a perfect mother, Lola, but I love you," she sobbed, clutching the carnations to her chest. "How could you want to hurt me like this, after all we've done for you?" It was their classic maneuver, the one they had perfected over decades. The narrative shift. In their play, I was always cast as the villain, the ungrateful daughter, the troublemaker, the one who was too sensitive. They were simply the long-suffering parents, doing their best. For 31 years, I had played my part. I had accepted the role. But this time, their one-woman audience was no longer buying a ticket to their show. I pushed myself up against the pillows, the movement slow and deliberate. My calm seemed to unnerve them. They were prepared for tears or shouting. They were not prepared for the quiet, chilling stillness of a soldier who had seen real combat. "I was 8 years old when I broke my arm," I began, my voice even and steady, cutting through my mother's fake sobs. The room fell silent. "You left me at the neighbor's house so you could go to Preston's baseball game." I looked directly at my father. He flinched. "When I got that scholarship to Portland State," I continued, my gaze unwavering, "you told me I had to be self-sufficient because all family resources were going to Preston." I turned to my mother, who had stopped crying and was now staring at me, her mouth slightly agape. "When I was lying in a hospital bed in Germany after losing my leg, the first thing you asked me on the phone was about my life insurance payout." I let the words hang in the sterile air, each one a carefully placed charge, detonating the foundation of their lies. I looked from one stunned face to the next. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. "This is a pattern." The silence was broken by Preston. He finally looked up from his phone, his arrogant smirk crumbling into raw, unfiltered rage. "Oh, cut the crap, Lola," he spat. "You're just doing this for the attention." And there it was, the final, fatal blow. The same accusation he'd hurled on Facebook, now delivered to my face. It was the last thread of a cord that had been fraying my entire life, and it snapped. I looked at my brother, at this man who had been the sun my family orbited around, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a vast, empty finality. I was no longer the timid little sister, desperate for a scrap of his approval. I was a woman who had survived IEDs and firefights. His petty insults were nothing. "No, Preston," I said, and my voice was as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "You're the one who has always needed the attention." I took a breath, a deep, cleansing breath of freedom. "I'm done." My gaze shifted past them, to the doorway where Nurse Clara stood, watching with a quiet concern. She had come to check on me, but had paused, sensing the gravity of the moment. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone in the room. "Clara," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Would you please escort these people out?" My father's face went purple with rage. "You can't be serious," he sputtered. "They are no longer my visitors," I stated, looking not at him, but at the nurse who had shown me more kindness in 2 days than he had in a lifetime. There's a moment in your life when you finally draw the line. It's terrifying, but it's also the most empowering thing you can ever do. If you've ever had a moment where you finally said, "Enough is enough," please support this story with a like. And in the comments, I'd be so grateful if you just wrote 2 simple words: line drawn. Let's see how many of us have been there. Clara nodded once, her expression firm and professional. She stepped into the room. "All right," she said to my family, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Visiting hours are over for you. This way, please." Watching them be ushered out of my room, my sputtering father, my weeping mother, my furious brother, I didn't feel a sense of victory. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt light. As the door clicked shut behind them, A crushing invisible weight I'd carried on my shoulders for 31 years simply lifted and dissolved into the sterile, antiseptic air. For the first time, I could breathe. After the storm of the confrontation, an unnerving quiet settled over my life. The angry phone calls stopped. The manipulative texts ceased. For the first time, there was silence. But it wasn't the lonely, heavy silence of before. It was a clean, empty space, a foundation cleared of rubble, waiting for something new to be built. And the rebuilding process began not with a grand gesture, but with a single, excruciating step. My first physical therapy session at the Portland VA hospital was an exercise in humility. My new prosthesis felt like a foreign object strapped to my body, a clumsy, painful anchor. My therapist, a no-nonsense former Marine Master Sergeant named Gus, had me stand between two parallel bars. "All right, Sergeant Shaw," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Let's see you walk." My first step was shaky. The second was worse. On the third, my knee buckled, and I went down, landing hard on the padded mat. I braced myself for him to rush over and help me up. He didn't move. He just stood there, arms crossed over his massive chest. "Falling is part of learning to walk again, Sergeant," he stated, his gaze intense. "Now show me how you get up." His method wasn't just about rebuilding muscle, it was about rebuilding willpower. Every grueling session, every trembling step between those bars was more than just physical exercise. It was me, reclaiming my independence, one painful inch at a time. It was an affirmation, spoken not with words, but with sweat and sheer grit, that I could and would stand on my own. While Gus was rebuilding my body, Margot was tending to my soul. She became my quiet guardian, my silent caregiver. She never once asked about my family or the news story. She never pried into my pain. She simply showed up. Some days she'd bring over a container of her homemade chicken noodle soup, the broth so rich and golden it felt like medicine. Other days, she'd just come and sit with me, watching old movies on TV or reading a book while I dozed on the sofa. Her presence was a comforting, non-judgmental warmth that asked for nothing in return. One afternoon, she found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring into space, wrestling with a familiar, suffocating guilt. The guilt of causing a scene, of tearing a family apart, even a broken one. Margot must have sensed it. She sat down opposite me and took out a small, well-worn Bible from her purse. She didn't preach. She just quietly read a single verse. "Come to me," she read, her voice soft. "All you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Rest." The word landed in my exhausted soul like a cool drop of rain in a desert. For my entire life, I'd believed that my worth was tied to my utility, my strength, my ability to endure without complaint. Margot, with those ancient, gentle words, was giving me permission to be tired. She was giving me permission to accept care without feeling like a burden. My other sanctuary was the waiting room of the VA. It was a world unto itself, filled with people who understood. Among them was Frank, a Vietnam vet in his late 70s with a perpetually grumpy expression and a faded Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. For weeks, he'd only ever give me a curt nod. But one day, he saw me staring blankly at the wall, lost in a particularly dark memory. He shuffled over and sat down in the plastic chair next to me, sighing as he settled in. "They'll never get it, kid," he said gruffly, without any preamble. I turned to look at him, startled. "Civilians," he clarified, staring straight ahead. "They see the uniform, but they don't see the cost. They don't see what you leave behind over there, or what follows you back here." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes surprisingly clear and sharp. "Don't expect understanding from people who haven't walked a mile in your boots. You'll just wear yourself out trying." His blunt, almost brutal honesty was more comforting than 100 sympathetic platitudes. It validated the profound sense of isolation I'd felt since coming home. He wasn't telling me I was wrong to feel alone. He was telling me I had every right to. A week later, he approached me in that same waiting room. He wordlessly handed me a small carved wooden box. I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was an old, tarnished insignia pin. "I've had that for 50 years, he said, his voice low. It reminds me that the scars you can see don't mean a damn thing compared to the battles you fight on the inside. He looked me straight in the eye. You're winning your battle, soldier. You hold on to that. I closed the box, the smooth wood warm in my hand. The simple, humble gift felt more valuable than a medal. The final piece of the foundation fell into place during a group therapy session. I mostly just listened, not ready to share my own story. A young female Air Force veteran, a girl who couldn't have been more than 22, was talking. She spoke in a quiet, ashamed voice about how she'd been sleeping in her Honda Civic for the past month because she couldn't pull together enough money for a security deposit on an apartment. Her story hit me like a physical shock. I saw my own struggle reflected in hers, just in a different, more desperate form. My abandonment had been emotional, a matter of the heart. Hers was systematic, a failure of the very country she had served. I thought about the thousands of veterans who came home, not to a cold, empty house, but to no house at all. Veterans with no Margot to bring them soup, no Frank to offer a quiet word of understanding. And in that moment, listening to that young woman's quiet desperation, a seed of an idea began to germinate in the cleared-out space of my heart. It was a fragile, tentative thought, but it was there. Maybe the purpose of my own pain wasn't just to be survived. Maybe it could be a bridge. Maybe I could use my story to build something that would help my sisters in arms, so that none of them would ever have to face the silence and the darkness alone. The idea that had sparked in the therapy group refused to be ignored. It was more than a fleeting thought. It became an obsession, a quiet hum of purpose that buzzed beneath the surface of my days. I spent hours online, researching the specific, frustrating gaps in the support system for female veterans. The big organizations did great work, but they were slow. What about the immediate, small-scale emergencies? The flat tire that keeps a vet from a job interview. The unexpected utility bill that could lead to an eviction. The bus ticket needed to escape a bad situation. A week later, I called Julian Vance. We met at a bustling coffee shop in the Pearl District, the air filled with the aroma of freshly ground espresso and the murmur of conversation. I felt a nervous energy crackling in my veins, a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. "So, what's on your mind, Sergeant?" he asked, sliding a latte across the table to me. I took out a pen and grabbed a paper napkin. The idea was still a jumble in my head, but as I started to speak, it began to take shape. I sketched it out for him right there on the thin paper. "It's a rapid response fund," I explained, my words coming faster now. "For female vets in crisis, not huge grants, small, immediate micro-grants, a few $100s for a security deposit, money to get the power turned back on. A bus ticket home, no long bureaucratic applications, just quick, decisive help to get them over the immediate hurdle." Julian listened intently, his eyes fixed on the napkin. When I finished, he didn't say it was a nice idea or that it would be difficult. He leaned forward, his expression serious, and tapped a finger on my crude drawing. "This isn't just a good story, Lola," he said, his voice filled with a conviction that mirrored my own. "This is a mission." That was all I needed to hear. With Julian's media savvy and the help of a pro bono lawyer he knew, things moved with surprising speed. We filed the paperwork, set up a simple website, and established a bank account. All it needed was a name. And for me, there was only one choice. It would be called Caleb's Legacy. It was a way to honor his unwavering belief in service, a way to transform my deepest loss into a living, breathing source of hope for others. Our first official meeting wasn't held in a fancy boardroom. It took place in the drafty, echoing community room of a local church, with its fluorescent lights and worn-out linoleum floors. There was no stage, no microphone, just a circle of mismatched chairs. About 15 people showed up. Margot was there, a warm smile on her face. My physical therapist, Gus, stood in the back, his arms crossed. And sitting right in the front row was Frank, the grumpy Vietnam vet, looking as skeptical as ever. A few other veterans I'd met at the VA were scattered throughout the small crowd. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood before them. I felt more nervous at that moment than I had during any firefight. I stood tall, planting my feet, one flesh, one carbon fiber, firmly on the ground. I had written a speech, but looking at their familiar, supportive faces, I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. I used to think family was about blood, I began, my voice quiet but clear in the small room. About who you were born to. But the war, and coming home? It taught me something different. I looked at Margot. Family is the person who shows up when you've fallen. Family is the person who brings you a hot plate of lasagna when you're too broken to cook for yourself. My eyes found Frank and Gus. Family is the person who tells you that you're not alone in your fight, even when you feel invisible to the rest of the world. I told them about Caleb, about his boundless compassion and his belief that service didn't end when you took off the uniform. I explained the idea I'd scribbled on a napkin, the idea of a safety net, woven by us, for us. This fund, I said, my voice thick with emotion but unwavering. It isn't about changing the world. It's about making sure that not one more of our sisters has to face the silence and the darkness alone. It's about being the family we all need when we come home. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Frank, without a word, reached into his worn leather wallet. He pulled out a crumpled envelope and walked up to me. He pressed it into my hand. "This is my pocket money from the last few months," he said gruffly, refusing to meet my eyes. It was $200 in cash. Use it to help some soldier girl not feel as damn lonely as we all did. And with that humble, profound act, it all began. Julian wrote another story, not about my past, but about my future. He wrote about Caleb's legacy. The article, shared with the hashtag #SeeChi Welcome Home Lola, ignited a new kind of firestorm. Not of outrage, but of support. The initial trickle of donations became a steady stream. Local Portland businesses, bakeries, breweries, software companies started calling, offering to partner with us. Veterans groups from all over Oregon reached out, wanting to know how they could help. My life, once defined by what I had lost, was now being defined by what we were building. The woman who felt invisible was now the hub of a growing network of connection and hope. There was no time to dwell on the past anymore. I was too busy. We were too busy. The 6 months that followed were a study in the nature of silence. The loud, angry silence of my family's initial fury eventually faded, replaced by something far more telling. The quiet, clumsy attempts to pretend nothing had ever happened. My phone, once a weapon against me, now occasionally delivered pathetic olive branches. My mother would text me glossy photos from her vacation in Florida, sunsets over the Gulf of Mexico, pristine golf courses with cheerful, hollow captions. "Thinking of you, how are you feeling?" As if her concern could be measured in pixels. Around Thanksgiving, a short, terse message from Preston appeared. "Mom's making a turkey. You can come if you want." It wasn't an invitation. It was a test. They weren't apologies. They were clumsy, self-serving attempts to pull me back into their orbit, to smooth over the cracks in their perfect facade, and most importantly, to alleviate their own guilt. I never replied. I simply read the messages, archived them, and moved on. My silence was no longer a cage of my own making. It was a shield, a boundary. One Tuesday morning, the universe decided to test that boundary. I was at a small cafe near my house, waiting for a coffee, when she walked in. My mother. Eleanor looked older than I remembered, the lines around her eyes deeper, her posture less confident. She saw me and froze, a deer caught in the headlights. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she rearranged it into a brittle, social smile. She approached my table, clutching her designer handbag like a life raft. She started with meaningless small talk, chattering about the dreary Portland weather, about Preston's booming real estate business. It was awkward, stilted. I just listened, sipping my coffee, offering nothing. Everyone misses you, Lola," she finally stammered, her gaze darting around the room, unable to meet mine. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and I felt nothing of the old anger, none of the familiar, aching need for her approval. I just saw a woman I used to know, a woman trapped in a narrative she was desperate to maintain. "I hope you're doing well, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. And then I stood up, picked up my coffee, and walked away. That brief, painful encounter confirmed what I already knew deep down. There was nothing left to say. The bridge between our two worlds had not just been damaged, it had been burned to the ground, and I had no interest in rebuilding it. We were strangers, bound only by a shared history and a web of DNA. I learned about the aftermath of their lives not through direct contact, but through the neighborhood grapevine, courtesy of Margot. Over our weekly Sunday dinners, she would occasionally share snippets she'd heard from old neighbors. There was no public shaming, no dramatic downfall. The consequences for the Shaw family were quieter, more insidious. Margot told me their annual, much-hyped 4th of July barbecue had been a subdued affair. The invitations to neighborhood Christmas parties had mysteriously dwindled. The friendly waves from across the street had been replaced with polite, distant nods. They hadn't been publicly condemned. They had simply lost the one thing they valued above all else: their audience. Their perfect family mask had been revealed for what it was, and the community, in its own quiet way, had stepped back. The respect and admiration they had worked so hard to curate had evaporated, leaving them isolated in their perfect, empty house. One evening, while scrolling through a local business journal online, I saw an article about Preston. He had won a Realtor of the Year award. There was a photo of him smiling his brilliant salesman smile, holding a glass trophy. I read a quote from his acceptance speech. "I couldn't have done this without the foundation of my family," he'd said. "Their unwavering support through the tough times has been my rock." 6 months ago, reading those words would have felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Now, it didn't hurt. It was just pathetic. I almost felt a pang of pity for him, for his desperate need to maintain a lie. His victory didn't affect me. His words had no power over me. That night, I started reading a book Margot had given me, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I came across a passage that seemed to be written directly for me. Frankl wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And I realized that's what I had been doing all along. I couldn't change my family. I couldn't force them to feel remorse, to understand, to apologize. Expecting them to change was a prison of my own making. The only thing I could control was my own reaction. The only person I could change was myself. In that quiet moment, I finally let them go. Not with anger, not with a dramatic declaration, but with a quiet, profound acceptance. I accepted them for who they were, strangers who shared my DNA. People who would forever be a part of my history, but would no longer be a part of my present. The acceptance didn't bring me joy, but it brought me something far more valuable. It brought me freedom. Freedom from expectation, freedom from pain, and freedom from the hope that they would one day, finally, see me. It's been a year since the day I came home, a year since the 28 missed calls and the cold, empty house. So much has changed, and yet, the most important changes are the ones you can't see. I'm standing in my backyard. The late afternoon sun warms my face, and a gentle breeze rustles the leaves of the new sunflowers I planted along the fence. I press my bare foot, my real one, into the soft, cool grass. I feel the solid strength of my prosthetic on the other side. I am steady. I am balanced. The garden, which was a tangled mess of weeds and neglect when I arrived, is now a vibrant tapestry of lavender, thriving tomato vines, and bright yellow squash blossoms. Margot's laughter drifts over the fence from her own yard, a familiar and comforting sound. I'm kneeling now, my hands deep in the rich, dark soil. In front of me is a small, hopeful-looking oak sapling. I'm planting it in the exact spot where the old, giant oak tree once stood, the tree I fell from when I was 8. For a long time, this spot in the yard held a ghost for me, a memory of pain and inconvenience. But not anymore. As I gently pack the earth around the young tree's roots, I'm not erasing the past. I'm transforming it. I'm planting a future in the very soil of an old wound, turning a place of trauma into a place of growth. My life now is a collection of small, beautiful things. It's the strong, bitter taste of the coffee Julian and I share on Wednesday mornings when we meet to go over the foundation's finances. It's the comforting weight of Margot's cat sleeping on my lap during our Sunday night movie sessions. It's the sound of genuine, unburdened laughter on the other end of the phone when I call a young veteran in Salem to tell her that Caleb's legacy has covered her security deposit, that she doesn't have to sleep in her car anymore. I've rediscovered the joy in things I'd long forgotten. The clean, earthy smell of the air after a Portland rain shower, the surprising sweetness of a sun-warmed tomato, picked right off the vine, the simple, profound feeling of being steady on my own 2 feet. There's a quote from Maya Angelou that I keep taped to my desk, right next to Caleb's picture. It says, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." I look at it every day. I was changed by the war, changed by my family, changed by the loss of my leg and the loss of my husband. But I was not reduced. I was remade. Caleb's legacy has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We're a respected nonprofit in Oregon now, a vital resource for hundreds of women who find themselves falling through the cracks. I am no longer Lola Shaw, the victim from the news story. I am Lola Shaw, the founder. The soldier who took the shrapnel of her own life and forged it into a shield for others. Caleb's photo sits on my desk, watching over everything. The handsome, smiling man in the picture is no longer a painful reminder of what I've lost. He's my guide. His legacy isn't one of sorrow, it's one of service. A quiet but constant North Star that shows me the way forward. The sun is beginning to set, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. I'm sitting on my back porch now, in an old wooden rocking chair, a warm mug of herbal tea cradled in my hands. The air is cool and smells of damp earth and blooming night jasmine. It is perfectly, beautifully peaceful. My phone, sitting on the small table beside me, buzzes once. I glance down. The screen is lit up with a notification, a text message from my mother. I look at her name for a long, quiet moment. I don't feel anger. I don't feel sadness. I don't even feel curiosity. I simply see the letters, and they are the letters of a stranger's name. With a calm, deliberate motion, I reach over and turn the phone face down on the table. The screen goes dark. I close my eyes and lean my head back against the chair. I take a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool Portland air. I feel the solid wood of the porch beneath my feet. I hear the distant sound of wind chimes from Margot's yard. A small smile touches my lips. This is the revenge. It's not loud. It's not bitter. It's not a victory march or a final cutting remark. It's just this. The quiet hum of a life well lived. The warmth of a teacup in my hands. The unshakable, profound, and radical act of being at peace. Peace is the quietest and the sweetest revenge of all. Before we go, I just want to say one last thing. Thank you. Thank you for listening and for hearing me. My story has found its peace, but I know so many of you are still in the middle of yours. This channel was created to be a space for stories just like this. Stories of resilience, of finding your voice, and of discovering that family can be chosen. If you believe in the power of these stories, please like this video so others can find it and subscribe to join our community. Remember, you are the author of your own peace.